Right. So thank you so much for coming to the very first session. It's not usual to get a crowd in the first session. So I appreciate that. Right. So I only have 20 minutes. So please leave your questions to the end of the session. Um, how do we get Postgres to the next level? What is the motivation for this talk? The motivation is that if you haven't understood this by now, Postgres is kind of important. Um, and Postgres is also accelerating, which I think is the reason why you showed up to the early morning session as well. Postgres, some people, I would, is probably becoming the next Linux in the sense that it is so important that everything is running on Linux. And I think we're reaching a point where anything that's using a relational database will soon be running on Postgres. Already, most of the major, let's say, businesses and corporations are switching or have already switched totally to Postgres. And this means something. I co-wrote this talk with Hedy Dombrovskaya, who is a database architect at DRW. She's also the founder of Prairie Postgres non-profit organization. She's the communications chair for the ACM in Chicago. She has recently been elected to the Linux Professional Institute Board of Directors. She's also the local Postgres user group organizer and is organizing a brand new conference called PGDay in Chicago. She has also co-written a book, which is fantastic, about Postgres query optimization. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to come co-present this at PGDay Lowlands, but let me just go through a few details about myself. I'm a systems and database architect. I'm based in Edinburgh, across the sea. I have been using open source and trying to contribute to open source for the past 25 years. Postgres exclusively for the past 17 years, both in a personal and a professional use. I'm a member of the Postgres Europe Diversity Committee. I've written a book called Postgres Mistakes and How to Avoid Them, and co-written another book called the Postgres 16 Administration Cookbook, and a Postgres extension called PGStatViz for the visualization and time series analysis of Postgres internal statistics. Now, some of this talk is based on ideas that were presented by the late, great Simon Riggs in his keynote in Prague at PGConf.eu 2023. His talk is linked in the slides, but you can find it on YouTube at the PGConf.eu channel. It was called The Next 20 Years, and he tried to predict things that would happen with Postgres and to Postgres in the next 20 years. We've selectively picked a few points from his presentation to discuss. We believe that the three pillars for the future of Postgres are, first of all, improving the code quality. Second, adding new features to Postgres. And third, advocacy and growing the community. And I will go into each one of those pillars in some detail. So the code quality, what do we mean by that? And why is it important? So code quality is critically important because we want reliability. And if you're an organization, whether it's an institution or a corporation or a private user that runs critical systems, and you want those systems to remain operational and reliable at the order of millions of operations a second, then you want Postgres to be reliable for that. And this is also why we want to take Postgres to the next level, and we don't want to be considered a database for startups, as Postgres was considered until recent years. So how do we get there? How do we improve code quality in the Postgres project? First of all, we have great tests, but we need to expand the test coverage. And also, we need to think about benchmarking in a very serious way. Benchmarking for Postgres is different than any other database because we are not afraid of getting bad results, right? If we get bad results in our benchmarks, that's the best thing for us because we know there's a problem and we can fix it. So it's a positive thing. We're not this other corporate commercial database that sues you for publishing benchmarks, right? And to do that, we probably should establish a dedicated performance team, people who only worry about this day and night. They write the tests, they expose the problems, they suggest solutions, and then those solutions get applied to the core code. Another thing we can do is define what Postgres is. So let's say that standard Postgres is something that is compatible with Postgres. What is compatibility, right? So what are the tests that need to pass so that we can say that this thing is Postgres compatible? We have seen this term thrown around in recent years with various degrees of compatibility touted as being Postgres compatible. In some cases, the databases that are marketed as Postgres compatible are not even relational databases. So that's completely ridiculous. We need to fix that. So in Postgres Europe, in Riga, later this year, we've set up during the Community Day a session a working session where we can discuss this, where we can come up with ideas and tests to establish a standard and say that this is Postgres. Anything that doesn't pass these tests is not Postgres. Simple. Right. So, again, how do we get to the point where we have better code quality? Another thing we can do is uncouple the development of Postgres subsystems. So right now, Postgres is a big monolithic chunk of code, which isn't terribly bad, but as the project grows, it is really difficult to swap in bits and swap out bits, which is why we're stuck with one table access method, basically, that everyone uses. Everything else is an extension, right? It would be nice if we could uncouple the development of subsystems, and if we could also version subsystems and say that, oh, you know, I'm running the latest Postgres, but I'm also running AIO version 2, which is more advanced than AIO version 1 for asynchronous I/O, right? So it would be good. And you could also, if you were adventurous enough, be able to run the stable versions of a subsystem, but also try out the experimental versions of a subsystem in the same Postgres installation. So to do that, we need ways to build Postgres in a modular way, which isn't possible right now. And if you have modules, of course, you need a dependency system because you don't want one experimental version of a subsystem causing incompatibilities with the rest. Now, let's move to adding new features, which is a point of contention because the developers of Postgres think that some features are needed and are working very hard to roll them out. But is that in line with what the users of Postgres want? So, survey says, we had a survey, and very informal one on the internet, and we asked people what they would like to see in Postgres most. 20% that was the top percentage of responses, said they would like to see vacuum gone forever. Which isn't what the developers are working on. It's not even close to being what the developers are working on. The second thing was online major version upgrades. It's a major pain point right now. If you're running Postgres in production and you want to upgrade to the next version, you have to find a way to minimize your downtime, because downtime is inevitable. In the third position, we have a shared request, 8%, for easy database forking for testing, because right now you have to do this whole dump and restore procedure in order to be able to fork your database to give to your developers for testing. And also bitemporal tables, which is also known as time travel. Tables that store every change that's ever happened to them, and you can query a table at some point in the past without having to keep separate history or auditing tables, as many of us do. So what do we observe? We observe that all of the finalists are unexpected. They're not things people are talking about visibly on their blogs or on the internet, or more importantly, on the development mailing lists. So what we would presume before holding the survey that the favorites would be, we were discussing optimizer hints, we were discussing multi-threading, we were discussing built-in high availability features like building PG bouncer inside of Postgres. None of them made the list. They were very low in terms of user priorities. Other features that we can talk about that would be nice to have in Postgres would be an in-memory hash table, something like a built-in Redis thing, so that we could have fast, minimal access to huge data. And also we could use such a thing for global query caching, which is a feature that people are asking of Postgres, and we don't have it. And you could also cheat and serve slightly stale data with result caching if it's not critical. Sharding is another feature, but what does it mean? Because people have multiple concepts of what sharding means. So it's not just about to be able to connect to nodes holding different data sets, because that can also be implemented in a workaround way or with extensions that people have built with foreign data wrappers and so on. So I think the big question to be asked is, how do I perform a point-in-time recovery and restore the entire cluster of sharded nodes to that specific point in time, right? This is something people haven't thought about, but it's really important in a, let's say, enterprise scenario. Also, we are getting requests to improve Postgres' scalability. Multi-threading is one of those things that could improve scalability for large enterprise environments. So what do we get out of this? We need to actively listen to the community. We need to start listening to the user base, because the features they want, if they don't get them, they will find a database that gives them those features and use that. Now, we mentioned the community. What is the community? So the Postgres community is a diverse global network. It is not just a small group of core developers and their friends anymore. Right? So we're talking here about individuals who are using Postgres, who are contributing to Postgres, who are coding for Postgres, right? And who are advocating for its use. And these are the people who build and promote Postgres. They are also companies. Companies are part of the community. Do I see surprised looks? No, because generally speaking, in the open source world, we tend not to think of companies as members of our community, but they are, because they employ the contributors that actually build Postgres in some cases. They build their solutions on Postgres, and in that way, they invest in the ecosystem of Postgres. And then finally, we have the end users. The end users are private users, public users, corporate entities. They rely on Postgres to get stuff done. So how do we reach out to the community, and how do we perform advocacy? We really need to think about this because we haven't been the greatest project at it. So what we should do is understand the human trends and how they impact the adoption of Postgres. So we're talking about what developers prefer, we're talking about what users expect, and we're talking about workforce and skills. What does that mean? How do people build up skills around Postgres, right? What is their Postgres knowledge level? Can they find jobs relevant to Postgres, and so on? So the Postgres project does need to change, and it needs to grow to be able to cope with the growing user base that we're seeing. We need to welcome as many people as possible and as many organizations, whatever organizations means, into the community. And by organizations, I mean all these users that I mentioned previously. We do need to learn from other open source projects, and we need to adapt their successful strategies. We need to see how they broke through to the developer community, how they broke through to the corporate world, and try to emulate them. For that, and for building up skills, we definitely need official training materials. We have a couple of pages of documentation that are great. They're very dry and very technical. We have a couple of tutorials that haven't been updated in 20 years probably. We require for this a dedicated documentation and training team in the project because it's a full-time job. We can't rely on the developers who are working so hard to bring you all of this to also produce training materials because it's another full-time job they need to have. Again, on the topic of advocacy, we need to demonstrate the power of Postgres. We need to attract developers, and we need to attract non-code contributors as well to the project. The people who are demonstrating the power of Postgres and talking about it and promoting it. And back to the developers, when we're talking about Postgres developers, or people who would like to develop for Postgres, we are kind of unfriendly to someone who wants to get started. I've seen countless questions on mailing lists and threads and Slack and whatever, saying, I want to start coding for Postgres. How can I do that? And the question is inevitably, oh, go find something or review someone else's patch. That's not helpful to someone who doesn't know anything about how the project works. The development workflow is a big problem. It is stuck in the past. Developers who come out of school now are not familiar with this development workflow, that there's one mailing list. We discuss everything on the same mailing list. This mailing list, for me, is a huge problem and is driving people away. I used to read it. I don't anymore because it's getting 3,000 emails a month. That is an insane amount of traffic, right? So it needs to be broken up. We need to rethink this because it's not easy for people to penetrate our world. So the 2025 Stack Overflow survey recently came out. For professional developers, The most popular technologies, as you will see, are Postgres, and far behind is everyone else. But for those learning to code, Postgres isn't at the top for some reason. It's in third position, and it's like almost 10 points behind. Why is that? So this tells us that application developers, not Postgres developers, right? People who are using Postgres to build applications do not have a good entry point to our project. And this may lead to a potentially negative experience. One thing we could do is have a professional advocacy foundation, which of course would be accountable to the project's leadership, and it would do targeted marketing, strategic communications, and so on, everything that you need to break through. It would promote the brand of Postgres, and it would enhance the perception of Postgres among enterprise, developers, decision makers, researchers, and educational institutions. Postgres is not there in academia. It should be everywhere, and universities are not using it. So it would also ensure the consistent representation of Postgres at big tech events, and not just our lovely small Postgres-specific ones. So, in conclusion, Postgres is gaining popularity, and it's attracting new users from everywhere, but we need to support its position as the market leader that it recently became, right? We need to standardize, we need to focus on our code quality, and we need to focus on our tests. We need to empower the development of new features instead of telling people, go on this list with 3,000 emails a month and try to get your code in, which is impossible. If you've tried to send the smallest patch to the PG Hackers mailing list, and you're not an existing Postgres committer, it's nearly impossible. The future of Postgres depends on our community. We should invest in it. We should actively engage with the community, and we should expand it through advocacy, as we said, and make our changes look inward and make changes in the project to accommodate that. So, some shameless plugs for the last few seconds. PG Data is happening in Chicago next year. The CFP opens next month. It's going to be a fantastic event. And as a thank you for braving, someone shouting at you for the first session, I can give you a discount code for my book and anything else on the Manning website. Any questions? Yes. Thank you.
Question? Yeah. So apparently, according to a survey of a user base, I don't know what it was founded on, 20% of the people think that vacuum is a problem. In my experience, what I've seen so far is when vacuum is a problem, it's usually because of bad tuning or no tuning at all, or not understanding how vacuum works.
I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
Is it a problem that people run into? Yes, it is. Because they don't want to worry about this sort of thing, right? If they're very advanced DBAs and they've spent a lot of years tuning and worrying about how Postgres works, yes, they are aware of this and they take care of auto vacuum, they take care of all the settings. But it doesn't work out of the box for most of the people.
So what I'm actually really surprised of is that not the top of the list is that out of the box, Postgres is tuned for a Raspberry Pi.
Sorry?
That Postgres out of the box is tuned for a Raspberry Pi and not for a server that it actually runs on.
Yes. Now that's a different story. The defaults of Postgres are very conservative and they're meant to help you run it anywhere, right? If you try to install like a huge commercial database that we won't mention on your laptop, it will require more memory than you have on your laptop by default. So you're not even able to install it. So that's why the defaults are very conservative. But yes, you need to be aware, and this is in my book, by the way. You need to be aware that the defaults are ultra conservative and are not suitable for use in production. Yes?
Okay, so we have time for only one question, and then we.
I couldn't hear you, sorry. Okay, so out of the box, Postgres runs much faster than some other database. Yeah, okay. It could be true, but every workload is different, right? You need to think about this. Every workload is different. So what's working fast for you, the same settings will not work for someone else.
Jimmy is going to be the whole day here, so you can ask him questions then during the break. And we also would like to give him a handmade key ring as a special present for our speaker. So please give applause for Jimmy once again.
Thank you so much.